More than 4,400 African American men, women, and children were hanged, burned alive, shot, drowned, or beaten to death by white mobs between 1877 and 1950. Millions more fled the South as refugees from racial terrorism, profoundly impacting the entire nation. Until now, there has been no national memorial acknowledging the victims of racial terror lynchings. On a 6-acre site atop a rise overlooking Montgomery, Alabama, the National Lynching Memorial is a sacred space for truth-telling and reflection about racial terror in America and its lasting legacy. This paragraph can be found on the homepage of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice website. Images on the website show a memorial comprised of 800 steel columns arranged in a square, suspended, hanging from above. Each piece of steel represents a United States county in which a lynching took place. Scattered throughout the grounds are statuary depicting the chains of slavery, the ugly truth of Reconstruction, and life under Jim Crow. The memorial, as the website suggests, is designed to help us come to terms with the evils of racism, to recognize that racism is still very much a part of life in our country, and to chasten all of us until we can all say with conviction, nevermore, and understand that we are saying it to ourselves. I know that this memorial needs to be in Montgomery, where so much of the civil rights story was written, but I sure wish it were closer to the nation's capital. Because if it were closer to the nation's capital, we would all be reminded, first, that racism isn't just a Southern thing. Second, that systemic racism is perpetrated by the laws and policies of the government of our land. And third, so that tourists who come to visit Washington, D.C. and stand in reverence of all those things that we hold dear about our country might also be able to take in this display of how profoundly flawed we are. And to really appreciate the fact that the white supremacists who gathered in Lynchburg on this day last year, and the white nationalists who will gather today in Washington, D.C., are not essentially much different than the people who carried out the lynchings memorialized on that Montgomery, Alabama hill. As long as people of color are at this kind of risk just by virtue of who they are and how they look, then those of us who are white, whether we are on the right or the left, need to accept that ours is a life of privilege. I believe that systemic racism is perhaps the most important issue of our time, and I believe that the future of our country may largely be determined in the next 20 or 30 years by how our white male power structure is able to adapt to losing the power it has enjoyed for so long. I remain hopeful that these white nationalist rallies are acts of desperation carried out by those who are on the wrong side of history, but I don't know. Another reason I selfishly wish this memorial was closer to us is that then we would all have a visual reminder nearer to home of what a modern-day crucifixion might look like. Crosses, once despised and resisted even by Christians because they were ugly, have now become things of beauty. Even crucifixes are most often seen as works of art The power of the event portrayed lost just a little by virtue of its familiarity. But how about this as a symbol of crucifixion? A statue of a family of three, perhaps, hung by the neck, with ropes thrown over a big branch of an old oak tree. Might do a better job than the cross of reminding us of our sinful nature and our stubborn reluctance to admit it. Hanging between heaven and earth, there's power in that image. And I have a feeling that the power of that image is what drives the story that Beth just read for us today. The story of the death of Absalom. In one way, the story of the death of Absalom is yet another example of the brutal violence of the Old Testament, right? Thousands killed at the hands of an angry God, it says. So often that equation gets made, right? Old Testament violence, New Testament loving. In another way, though, the story is not only very personal, it's also filled with heart and, dare I say, love. It is, at its heart, a story about a very flawed father and a very flawed son, and their love for each other. Now, sometimes fathers and sons get along just fine, right? Sometimes it happens. They're out at the ball game, washing the car together, or walking down a trail with fishing rods in their hand, whistling a happy tune. And that's a good thing. Other times, though, not so much. In fact, lots of times the relationship between a father and his son is fraught. And thanks to people like Sophocles and Shakespeare and Freud, the worse the relationship is between father and son, the more attention it gets. David and Absalom had their issues. The Bible tells us that Absalom was a beautiful child, the third son of David. And as he grew, his personality grew as strong as his beauty. The handsome young Absalom inherited his father's good looks, was described as the most handsome man in the kingdom. He was oozing with charisma. He made a connection with the common people of Jerusalem. He built a strong base of support. And then Absalom began to get ideas. He began to sow the seeds of discontent among folks who were beginning to grow tired of King David, who was also, you'll remember, young and charming and a favorite of his day, but who, let's face it, had been around for a while and had done a few things to tarnish his reputation. Soon enough, there was open rebellion. And Absalom declared himself king and drove his daddy right out of town, like a thief in the night. Well, as it turns out, David was not ready to hand over his throne to his son. And as it turns out, David's military instincts were still very much intact. So he sent his outnumbered soldiers deep into the woods of Ephraim, where he launched his attack on Absalom's forces. He drew them into the thick forest and was able to win what was essentially a guerrilla war. Our story picks up after Absalom's army was defeated. As much, it says in the text, by the forest as by the sword. And the handsome, long-haired, charismatic Absalom was on the run through those dangerous woods, trying to escape the fate that had met so many of his soldiers. And that was when Absalom ran into big trouble in the form of a low-hanging branch of a big oak tree. And a mule who was behaving like mules sometimes behave chose its path strategically. Absalom's beautiful head of hair got stuck in the branch of the tree. Absalom stopped. The mule kept going, and there he was, the robed king, the beautiful king, the charismatic king, hanging, utterly helpless, between, it says, heaven and earth. That which had made him so powerful and so compelling, that long hair, was the very same thing that brought him down. There is a lesson in that somewhere, right? Strength in our weakness, weakness embedded in our strengths. For today, what interests me is that relationship between David and his son. Prior to the battle, do you remember what David said? "Deal gently with my son," he says. In spite of all the betrayal, deal gently with my son. David wanted it both ways. He was stunned from being a king and being a daddy. Deal gently with my son. Can you hear just a hint of the love revealed in the story Jesus told of the prodigal son? Deal gently with my son, David asks his commander Joab. I was listening to author David Sedaris this week on the radio. David Sedaris is known for being very funny when he writes, but on this show his topic was more serious. He was talking about his sister, Tiffany, who lived with mental illness for most of her life and suffered, as so many do, from co-occurring addictions, and who eventually took her own life. One of the things David shared was that though Tiffany distanced herself from all of her family, she would regularly call her father and would spend the whole time, the whole conversation, as David said, railing at him, just yelling and screaming and giving it to him. That was back in the days of collect calls, when you had to accept the charges of someone calling long distance. And to his credit, David said, his father always accepted the charges and let her talk, because it was the one way he knew she was still alive. There's a hint, and maybe even more than a hint, in the story of David and Absalom, of a long-suffering love of a parent for a child, a love that can't be turned off, a love that accepts the charges, a love that actually all of us count on as week after week we tell the one we call God, "I'm so sorry," when we offer our prayer of confession. The moment in this story that strikes me so, given the times that we live in, is that next moment. The moment when Joab, the commander of David's forces, hears that his soldier actually followed the king's orders and spared Absalom. When he saw him hanging between heaven and earth, Joab reads him the riot act. Then he goes out and he finds Absalom and quickly gives the son of the king exactly what he deserved. The text tells us what happened. Joab took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor-bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Does that sound familiar to you? Sounds a little like a lynching to me. I would never seek to compare a conniving, power-hungry son of a privileged king to all those innocent people who have been lynched over the years. I would, however, like to suggest this morning that the appropriate response, the gospel response to coming across someone, anyone who is utterly vulnerable, no matter what they've done to deserve our wrath, no matter what the laws of vengeance and violence would have us do, the appropriate response, the way our world might change and more accurately resemble the realm of God we have seen in Jesus, is for us to find a way to deal gently with Absalom when we find him suspended between heaven and earth, right where we want him. All those people in all those counties across America, in their own twisted logic, thought that the ones who swung on the end of those ropes deserved what they got. What each of those victims needed was someone to speak up and stop what was happening. And in the face of the violence we still know is real, God needs us to be the ones brave enough to say the same thing. Stop it. Never again. Whoever our Absalom might happen to be, there is someone, somewhere, who asks us, deal gently with my son.